Welcome back to Ashi and I's conversation on the show Bridgerton. Last episode, we talked about our favorite characters. We talked about Eloise. We talked about Edwina. We talked about what we think season 3 will bring. And now it's time to hear us talk about the costumes, the music, and some very steamy, sexy love scenes. So let's talk about the costumes. Because in
Hmm.
terms of historical accuracy on the show, let's talk about the moments in which the show twists historical accuracy. Uh,
Sure.
because it's what makes the show stand out as a period piece. And it works really well. And I've
Hmm.
distilled it down to costumes, music, and the presence of sex. So,
Mm.
in terms of costumes, a big reason why a lot of people love not just this show but period pieces in general are the costumes, because I mean
Hmm.
they're absolutely gorgeous, and anyone who hasn't watched the show, I encourage you to Google these costumes. And they're beautiful not just for the style at the time, and because they had suits and gowns with empire waists, but the colors are beautiful. You've got
So beautiful.
Yeah, you've got these beautiful, like light and muted pastels, which
Hmm.
especially looks gorgeous in, the park setting or
Hmm.
in gardens. And
Or
even,
the balls.
yes, yes. And whoever is the production designer knows how to use their color palettes for this. And because
100%.
certain characters are associated with certain color palettes. You've got the
Hmm.
Bridgerton family, who's always wearing light blue and light purple. And then you've got the Featherington family, who's always wearing yellows and gem
And
green.
oranges.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oranges, pinks. And the costumes, well, the costumes are pretty accurate. The world wasn't actually this colorful and aesthetic. As much as
Yes.
there were gorgeous gowns back then, and some of these gowns reflect some of the gowns back then. There were some really freaking ugly historical
Yeah.
costumes. Go
Well,
ahead.
here's what I think about that too. Well, if going back to what we said at the very beginning, like if this is a fantasy world and the slave trade isn't part of this, and diversity and inclusion is a big part of the society, then that would also mean that the trade services, I would assume, would probably be more extravagant. You're probably getting a lot more silks and a lot more trading agreements um, between countries internationally as well.
Interesting. The societal cultural affects the economic design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I just wonder. I mean, honestly, I am not a historian. Someone's probably gonna be like, "There, like colonialism did get all these things, and I'm just a stupid podcaster." But like, but I don't know. I'm just that's my actor brain trying to
Yeah.
logically, place a reason why these costumes would be as extravagant as they're not as historically accurate. But in my head, that's the reason why, and I'm sticking to that because it's fantasy, and why
Yeah.
not?
And because the reason it's not like completely historically accurate is not the idea that people didn't wear these things back then, but it's like there's no way everyone looks
Yeah.
this great all the time.
Yes.
It's kind of the same with Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. You watch the show and you're like, man, these costumes are fantastic. But not everyone was wearing pastels and pinks and perfect pleated skirts in 1940,
Right.
especially not in New York. There should be a lot more, hobos in 1950s New York. People
Yes.
dressed up.
100%. Yes. But we have to talk about the wigs.
Oh,
The
that's
wig design of Bridgerton, because even like not even just okay, we're gonna talk about the Queen because her wigs
go
were
ahead.
extraordinary, but just all of the main characters, their wigs were phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely.
That's interesting you mentioned the Queen because, first off, while everyone is wearing the Empire waist gowns at the time, the Queen was wearing like very 1776 costumes. And
Yeah,
because
like Marie Antoinette.
yeah, her husband was King George, as in like
Hmm.
King George the Third. So like before the Regency period was Georgian England, like she is wearing that Georgian attire. Um,
Hmm.
I think realistically, if she was the queen, she would have kept up with the fashion. She would have like tried to wear what everyone else was wearing. Um, but it does, and Lady Danbury has more hoops and like crinoline than the rest
Hmm.
of the younger gals too, because Lady Danbury is also in that generation. It kind of separates them by their generation, but it does
Yeah.
distinguish the queen as and her posse of like other wig wearing, hoop wearing gals as being like of the more like upper crust of the aristocracy.
Yes.
So
And it's
that's definitely
also,
a choice.
yeah, 100%. And not to mention that the queen is just, like how I saw her was like, if Marie Antoinette was black, this is what she would look like. Because, the dresses, they are like Georgian and all of her posse have like the same big white powdered wig with a mole and red lipstick.
Yeah.
But it's very clearly like this is the Queen's gang, like this is the Queen's posse. But the wigs, so for the listeners out there, like if you just look up, the Queen's wigs in Bridgerton, you'll see how many different styles they did. But they had her in afros, like just as big as we see in Marie Antoinette's hair in the old pictures and movies. That's how big they had the Queen's hair in Bridgerton, except most of the time they were afros with lots of ribbons and buttons and necklaces and jewelry. And it was just it's absolutely beautiful to see because her hair is wonderful, but most of the time in period pieces we usually see how to style and curl straight hair. We never really see how they style and curl, naturally curly hair.
Yeah.
So it was really cool the way that they explored that in this world of Bridgerton as well.
That's cool.
And it's so interesting because it's almost like I mean, it's set in the 1800s, but the way that they do the queen's wigs, it's almost like they're taking hairstyles of today and modernizing it, but also like putting it in the past. Like, there are some hairstyles that she had where her hairs are braided or she's wearing dreads, but it's stacked on top of each other with gold, clasps, and it comes down in a side ponytail. So it's like it's even though the styling of it is a little contemporary, it looks the way that they do it looks like it's so part of the world you wouldn't even question it.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And you definitely
Yeah.
gave me a new perspective
Yes,
on details
100%.
I didn't even notice before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whose costumes are your favorite?
Uh I would say the queen. Honestly, yeah. Honestly, I would have to say the queen because we don't see her that often. So every time we see her, she is in a different look entirely,
That's very
according to the event that we're having, whether it's a ball, whether it's we're seeing her in a carriage. But most of the time, we usually see her where she's in her prime, like where she's like literally been getting prepared for this for about a week. And that's every time we see her. So every time we see her, we see a new dress, a new gown, new hairdo, and every time it is breathtaking. So I would have to say it would have to be the queen hands down.
yeah. My favorite costume wardrobe is probably Edwina's. And because that's the one I love
Oh,
all like pinks and like light and blushing colors and like has like very light floral accents, and that's definitely if I was in the show or if I was, living in that world, I would want that wardrobe. I would want to be dressed like that all the time.
yeah. It was interesting that you liked Edwina's because Edwina wears more of like lilacs and pinks, whereas Kate usually wears the darker colors, like darker purples or teals, um,
Um,
or like gem colors. Yeah.
yeah, and because even with my own wardrobe, I mean, like my whole room is like a light pink, and I have a lot of like light floral pieces. I have a lot of like light purple pieces. but I'm trying to move my wardrobe to be mostly those colors. Though
Mm.
I have a lot of like dark fall tones. Like for some
Hmm.
reason fall tones have always I don't know, just like I just keep buying fall tones and they work for me and they work with the fact that I live in New York City. Like I feel like it adds to the New York aesthetic when I put it on. But like I don't
Yes.
know, but like I want to have Edwina's color palette. I'm trying to dress myself more in spring colors.
I mean, honestly, that's what, like, New York, you can dress however you want.
Mm.
Like, you can wear spring colors in the fall, and it'd be like, oh my gosh, like, whoa, look at you. That's so cool. Wearing purple in an orange season, like, cool colors in a like in a warm season. That's crazy, rebel. So yeah, so do whatever you want. And honestly, you look great in those colors, so it's
Thank
fine.
Thank you. So, for
Yeah.
you, because I dream of wearing those dresses. I mean, with every
Yes.
period piece I watch, I dream of wearing those dresses.
I
And
dream of wearing those dresses too.
that's what I was about to ask. And I was also about to ask, like, do you dream of wearing the suits as well? Or is it like, fuck the suits when the dresses exist?
Hell no. I never go and put myself unless I'm unless I'm getting paid to do it, I will never put myself in what the men put themselves in the show. Like there are so many layers and like even just renting a tux for prom is already too much for me. So no.
I mean, same
And
for the gals, though admittedly the end product looks much cooler than the suits.
very true. Very true. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't even want to put myself in these dresses too. I feel like the Bridgerton era is nice to look at, but I wouldn't want to go through it myself.
Hmm. Well, because did I tell you I own a ball gown? I own a
Oh, yes.
style ball gown.
Yes, I know because of the
Diggins Fair.
festivals you go to.
Yeah,
Yeah, the fairs.
And that's definitely something that I do not wear all the real layers. Uh,
Yes.
if I did wear all the real layers, like boy, I mean, I would not have the time. Even with what I do have, what I wear is I wear a hoop skirt, I wear the regular skirt, and then I wear like a bodice. And then underneath those, I wear kind of like regular tights underwear, like normal high heels. Um,
Does it get hot?
Actually, if anything, I get cold. Uh,
Huh.
because it's always in the winter time, and even though we're inside, it's just a little bit drafty. And
Mm,
they keep it drafty for the men in the coats. But I
mm,
have like a shawl, like a kind of a cape I put over my
very
outfit.
nice.
And yes, but
Come on,
it
lady, whistle down.
doesn't. I know,
Cape.
but it doesn't completely keep my arms warm as much as I would like it. I think the thing
Gotcha.
I think the hardest thing is when we're driving there
Hmm.
and I'm sitting down in my bodice. And that
Ah, yeah, I can
actually
see that.
kind of crushes my lungs. If I'm standing up, I feel great. But, it takes I already feel bad having my mom, tie me into that thing with just like the few amount of layers I do commit to.
Right.
So, but it's still so worth it to be able to like say I have a ball gown and I've had it
Yes.
since I was 12. It's an
Wow.
investment that keeps on giving.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Um,
That's awesome.
Definitely well used. So, on to the music of the show. The show often includes violin versions of modern songs, which I actually think is a really fun and great idea because I have a theory that by playing a song that we already know, it engages our brain in a familiar way while making us feel immersed in a scene. So, some of these
100%.
songs, yeah. So, some of these songs include Thank You Next by Ariana Grande, Wildest Dreams by Taylor Swift, Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus,
Oh
Bad
yeah.
Guy by Billie Eilish, and I think they had like Material Girl. But there were a
That's
couple.
okay. It was Material Girl second season.
Hmm Was that your favorite song so far?
Yeah, so you already said the ones that I was gonna say, but first season, Thank You Next, I think that was the first song.
That was in the
I think
first
that might have been the
episode.
very yeah, that was the very first song that they played, and I was like, wait a second, that's Thank You Next
It grabbed
in
people's
violin
attention.
form. Yeah, and so I was like, okay, if they're gonna go in this direction for the rest of the season, I already know I'm gonna love it.
Mhm.
And then because it was such a big part of the Bridgerton, talk, the second season had even more songs. And in my favorite song in the second season was Material Girl because it was played at the ball and everyone was dressed so nicely and it was so fitting for the circumstance, but also it was just a fun, upbeat style of the song too.
Yeah, and because Material Girl has like made a comeback with our generation. Like,
Yes,
Thank You
especially with the
Next.
new rap.
Yeah, yeah. Thank You Next, Bad Guy. Like all of those are by, young 20-year-olds listened to by people our age released in the last few years. But Material Girl
Mhm.
is like, it's a comeback. And so it's an
Yeah.
indie song that's a violin cover.
Yes.
My favorite is probably Wildest Dreams. And because that's just the one that, like, I don't know, I play it in the back of my mind. Like, I genuinely
Mm.
play the violin cover of Wildest Dreams in the back of my mind.
Mm. That was, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say that was the outside ball. Was that when Daphne and Simon first got together?
I think so.
I want to say was that because I just remember it like fireworks maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah, and it just the I and the way that they play with music in the show is usually with silence. Like they usually don't pair music with dialogue. A lot
Yeah.
of the times they usually pair it with the dance sequence
And
or a
visuals.
very heightened moment and lots of visuals, and so it
Yeah.
makes the songs even more significant, which is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's talk about the other thing that makes the show a bit more modern, which is the inclusion of sex. Uh,
Sex. I
I
love sex.
I apologize to my mother, who I know is listening to this episode, but we can't just ignore it. Bridgerton has a lot of sex, and so we have to, like, so much in talking about what's different from season two and season one is talking about the sex scenes.
100%.
Season one has a lot more sex than season two. Uh,
Yeah.
in season one, there's like probably sex in the first 10 minutes. Some of those scenes are pretty long and explicit. It was definitely one of the big selling points in grabbing people's attention when the show first came out.
Sex sells. BEMT minor.
Yes, yes, yes. But it was way toned down during the second season.
Hmm.
We probably don't get a full sex scene till the finale. We see
We got a
people
sex scene with
Benedict,
Benedict.
but like we didn't actually see them have sex. We just saw two naked people walking towards the couch. Whereas, like, think about season one, we saw
Yeah.
like full on,
Thrown against the wall, clothes ripped off.
ripped out oral sex. So
Oh, I forgot about that.
and like while of course this draws attention to the show, but admittedly in season 1 it offered very important conversations about giving girls proper sex education and
Yes.
the outcomes of pregnancy.
And we also saw an introduction to masturbation. An introduction to masturbation.
Yes, you are so right. You are so
Yeah.
So how do you feel about there being less sex in the second season?
It actually didn't bother me. I for Bridgerton, I don't think that sex is the main point of the show. I think that it is a great. It's like it marks it like it mm, it marks moments really well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's significant to. Oh yes, but it's significant to the characters' developments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just sex for sex sake. There's always a reason for why this scene has sex in it, which I think is really important. And in season two, I don't think there are many reasons for us to have sex scenes. One, because the main couple, um, well, actually, all the couples were figuring it out. So there was probably less, opportunities for characters to even have sex because Anthony's trying to focus on one mate, and he was the one who mostly had sex in the last season.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. In the first season, I tried to skip through a lot of the scenes. Uh,
What?
because, well, because here's the thing, and this is what I'm going to say. It actually, as much as like there are, kind of social benefits, I guess, and like statements to why they include their sex scenes, it makes it harder to watch with your parents. And because Bridgerton, I
Oh.
started watching with my parents, and halfway through the season, I had to be like, guys, you watch on your own time. I watch on my own time. I'm sorry. And so I had to like, and so I think like I like that season two has us sex purely for that reason. Because
Oh,
I can like
gotcha.
discuss it with my parents and not be all like, so did you see the way Anthony and Sienna just really went at it? Um, but I definitely season one. I remember trying to skip through certain scenes and then realizing that there was plot in the middle of it.
Yes.
Like there's one specific scene where like the whole plot of that sex scene is that they do one person is like, let's do this specific position, and that actually is like a really bad thing for the other person. And so then it's like, oh, they're about to have sex, and then you skip forward 3 minutes, and then one person's like, F you, why would you do that? Ah! And then I'm like, wait,
Yes.
what happened when they were having sex? And so you're forced to
Yes.
watch it so that you know
Yes.
what happens.
Yes. See, okay, I will say that scene might be the most problematic scene in the entire show because then it starts going into the conversation of consent, which we don't have to go into for this podcast, but like
Yeah.
I overheard someone talking about that scene and I was like, "Oh shoot. I didn't even look at it that way." But yeah, it kind of
Yeah.
is yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. Crazy.
a rake scene without the K.
Yeah. Just to clarify for the listeners, it's that a female character uh keeps a male character from pulling out. So
Yes.
that's why there's a big issue with that.
Yes.
But yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. It
So
is wild.
how does the amount of sex in Bridgerton compare to other shows you watch? Because I feel like I don't watch a lot of shows with like sex, and I mean I feel like most shows like don't have sex, but considering
Yeah.
Euphoria is a big thing, Euphoria is
Oh
for
yeah.
a generation and is like way more graphic and also
Yeah.
drugs and stuff compared
Yeah.
to Bridgerton.
Yeah, so I think that's the difference between like British and American television, maybe. Um, I feel like in Bridgerton, the sex is important to the story, whereas I feel like in a lot of American television, the sex is just a normal thing. Like it's not as taboo for us to have sex before
Gratuitous.
marriage. Yeah, yeah, it's not as taboo for us to have sex before marriage as it is in British, or I guess even like period British television shows too. So it's like there's more added layers, which makes it more significant. Um, I will say they still have a lot of sex in Bridgerton. Like they have more sex in Bridgerton than I was expecting to see, and
Yeah,
so that was a really big surprise.
yeah.
I don't love it. I don't hate it. I think it was just great for the show. Um, but yeah, I guess compared to the other shows that I watched, hmm, this season, significantly less sex than what I usually see.
Mhm.
Last season, significantly more than what I usually see. So, I think it's like a equal balance.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Definitely, like, I think that if I didn't watch it with my parents, and not even like that I don't, not even the idea of like, oh, do I watch with my parents, do I not? But like, my grandma would love this show. She loves period pieces and specifically the Regency era. And I knew she would love Bridgerton if she could just avoid the sex scenes. And I convinced her to watch the first episode. She got 10 minutes in, saw
Yep.
Anthony and Sienna have sex, and she was like, "No, I am stopping here. I do not need to watch any more. Thank you." And I'm like, "No."
Oh
And
no.
which is weird because like with my mom, when I was like telling her that we were going to talk about Bridgerton on this podcast, and she was like, "You should talk about how great it is that they got rid of a lot of the sex in season 2, and they did it because it was drawing away people and they want to keep their audience." But then I read the New York Times every morning, and there's multiple articles of New York Times writers complaining about there being less sex in Bridgerton. And I'm
Okay,
like,
I also feel like that's a generational thing. I like,
yeah,
your mom being excited that there's less sex. I feel like that's a more generational thing because I know our generation was. I feel like, I mean, but then again, it goes into the question of like, who are they, like, which generation are they appealing more to? I feel like it's probably in the middle. I feel like they're probably appealing to the millennial generation and the older Gen Z generation.
that's what I was going to say is because it's probably the millennials at
Yeah.
writing at New York Times, the millennials who are like, I have a job here at the New York Times, but also I'm young and hip enough to write about Bridgerton, and I'm no longer in, my like college phase where I have lovers everywhere, I'm married and have a kid, so I'm not exactly like a Playboy scandal like the Duke of Hastings, but I need this constant stimulate.
Rick.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% think that's what it is because I never even would think to show this show to my grandparents, and I would still probably hesitate to show it to my parents. My mom watched Bridgerton and she really loved it,
Mhm.
but like it was more of like she asked me about it and I told her how good it was and that's why she tried it, but it wasn't like my suggestion
Yeah.
because I don't know. I don't really feel like it is for our parents' generation. I feel like it is for like if we had older siblings or much younger parents. I feel like that's what it would be.
hmm So, let's talk about this idea of the female gaze and then how this show depicts female sexuality. So,
There are female gays in the show. No, I'm just kidding. That was a
that
bad joke. Haha, LGBT. No, I'm just
was pretty good. I was caught off guard. Have
kidding.
you heard the term like female gaze in reference to
Yes.
Jane Austen works? So,
Hmm.
for the listeners, to distill the idea of like the male gaze versus the female gaze, when you see movies, think about like any Megan Fox movie. Megan
Hmm.
Fox is just like, just because she is so sexy, she is just like perpetually in the male gaze. Like, think about movies that have just where like every woman who is there has to be sexy, whereas there's, very like the men are allowed to be average. Um, and there's movies, a lot of movies and TV shows that have very gratuitous booby shots, kind of
Hmm.
pan up on a woman's body as she's, leaning over the counter. Um,
Hmm.
and the idea of two people getting together in a movie is focused on the idea of like a man winning a woman, and they're going to get together in order for like the man to be fulfilled, and a lot
Mm.
of the sexual jokes are going to be like male oral sex jokes. And the female gaze, what a lot of like movie scholars and feminist scholars have defined as the female gaze, they've defined as like the type of stories in Jane Austen books and Pride and Prejudice that's very focused on like what we were saying earlier of there being like a slow burn. And because there's this slow burn,
Mm.
there's instead of focusing on like the boobs and like the where like there would be butt or booby shots, there would be like shots of hands and shots
Mm.
of like eye contact. And
And the seduction with the line seduction.
yes, the
There are
idea,
things that I can teach you.
Yes, the idea of like almost like the characters having foreplay. And
Yeah.
the whole movie is about preparing towards when the characters finally get together. Um, and so the idea then with that is that supposedly the female gaze is more romantic based and intuition based and personality based, whereas the male gaze is more sexual. And I think that doesn't necessarily reflect life. Obviously, women have more sexuality, and men are attracted to romance and personality as well. But that's just how you see those romantic gazes depicted most often in media. So what's
Yeah. Or
interesting
an industry sense.
yeah, yeah. So what's interesting about Bridgerton is that we get some of that like quote unquote like female gaze, especially in the second season where it is like a slow burn and there's less sex. But like season one is really focused on women's sexuality. We do see like nudity. We don't see like genitalia beyond like boobs and men's butts.
Hmm.
But we still like see their actions, and like in those sex scenes a lot of what it's focused on is like men like giving oral to women, and then like the women having a good time. And instead of there being
Mm, yeah.
gratuitous shots of men, there's
Right.
or sorry, instead of there being gratuitous shots of women, there's gratuitous shots of men, like panning up and down their torso as they're,
Mm.
shirtless or naked or dripping wet, emerging
The
from.
thing of season two, when Anthony was coming from the lake and he was coming out of the water, and everyone
Oh
was
my
just
god,
focused on.
it was so funny. He like comes out of the water and his shirt is just like attached to his like abs, and like both Edwina and Kate are staring at him and they're just like
And Kate is like, we should not be looking at Edwina's, but like, and Edwina, the younger sister, is like, but why not?
She's the
Because
one. Kate is Edwina's the one who is most like shameless, like hubba hubba, and Kate is like, I'm not doing this, but I am.
she's like covering, using her hand to cover her eyes, but like, just separating her fingers just a little bit.
Yeah. So I feel like Bridgerton is like because it focuses so much on like female sexuality, it makes you realize where the discussion of female sexuality from the point of view of like female empowerment is
Yeah,
absent in other works. And
yeah.
so I wonder for you, Ashi, who is a gay man.
I'm gay?
How dare you out me?
No. Who could have known?
So, what is your point of view watching this? How do you think it can appeal to people who don't identify as female? And do you enjoy just seeing that uh, new perspective all the same?
Yeah. So what I think that Bridgerton does really well is that even though their sex scenes are heteronormative casting wise, just in terms of like this is a male and a female having sex,
Yeah.
what they do is that they do like universal cues, like touching, like they focus on like pressure points or a hand on someone's ear or their neck, and focusing on how that feels, or someone getting kissed on the neck, or when you're kissing on the lips, like breathing into each other's faces and mouths. Like they focus on more on the universal aspects of sex and love. And
Yeah.
even when they do oral, like, of course, a woman receiving oral is going to be different than a man, but the way that they film it is just they focus on the woman's face while the man goes down. So it's like, even though it's not something that I specifically partake in, I can identify with all of the things that the characters are feeling. But yeah, you feel like you're a part of it, whether you can identify with the gender or not. Like I feel like, and you know, maybe it is going into that female gaze where like there's less emphasis on the bodies and more emphasis on what the bodies are feeling, and maybe that's why you know you feel like you're a part of it. You feel so much from the characters because they focus on. I mean, the sound design is just absolutely incredible. I mean, they focus on they literally like emphasize the sounds of buttons being unbuttoned and lips touching
Yeah.
and breath, you know? So I actually, yeah, I honestly didn't really think about it that much until you brought it up. Like, I still feel just as,
Included.
yeah, included and turned on as everyone else does. Sorry, Mom.
I know, I'm going to be combing through this later, like, okay, if I was my mother, what would I say to keep and what would I say to throw out? So,
Hey, you see we wanted to talk about sex? Let's talk about sex.
exactly, exactly. So that being said, I mean, we've talked about the fact that there's like kind of this, and you know, you're not the only one to bring it up. The fact that there's just this like phantom of an LGBTQ love story that
Yeah,
like there's room for, and that there are audience members who like want, but it isn't formed there, you know.
yeah.
Uh, and so that's something that's missing. So I wonder for you, what would be your ideal romance movie?
Oh, what? That's hard. Well, I mean, I think personally, I think all people would love to see their own stories, you know, displayed in media.
Hmm.
I personally would love if they went with the Benedict sexuality, you know, exploration. Now, I was having a conversation with a conversation about this with someone else, and the trap, though, with having that story is that if Colin was bi,
You mean Benedict?
then I mean, sorry, if Benedict. No,
Okay.
no, 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 Benedict. Benedict, because we saw like, you know, so hints of that in the first season.
Yeah.
If Benedict was bi, if they were going to do a gay love story, it doesn't seem like LGBT is part of the inclusion of this world.
Mhm.
So if we were going to have that story, we're probably going to have the issue of like him having to come out and you know him having to go through the pain of not being able to be himself. And I
Oh,
don't know if we're going to be able to have a happy ending if it does become a gay love story because everyone's going to be against it. And even if they do, even if they are like, okay, Benedict, do what you want, we'll accept you, like he won't be able to marry.
yeah.
So it's like, ugh, if we go in that direction, it's probably going to be a more heartbreaking and not a gay, hopeful love story.
Yeah.
And then if we just go through, and then if we go in the other direction, which is just him exploring his sexuality, now he's just using men to figure out that he wants to marry a woman by the end of the season.
Mm.
And I feel like that's just as problematic as well.
Interesting.
So
I didn't even think about
yeah,
that idea.
yeah. So in terms of like, as much as I want to see a gay love story in Bridgerton, I don't think the world of the story lends itself for it to be a happy ending.
Yeah.
Now, that can be the writer's choice, of course, and like I'm not saying that there is no possibility for it not to be a happy ending, but just in the world that we've created in these first two seasons, I don't think it could be a successful love story in the way that I would want it to be, or in the way as like as a gay man I would hope for it to end. Um, and you know, I think they should stick with what they know. They know hetero love stories really well, and they're doing a really great job with it. I don't think that they should veer off to try to include more people. I think if they were going to do that, it should just be another show entirely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's just my personal take on that. Because as much as I would love to see a gay love story, I'd rather it just be another show.
Mhm.
Um, that's focused mainly on that gay love story rather than it just being like an extra thing they throw into a season.
There is a show called Gentleman Jack, I believe it's
Oh,
called, that is about like two lesbians. Here, I just looked up. It's
Um,
1832 in West Yorkshire, England, the cradle of the evolving Industrial Revolution, where landowner Anne Lister is determined to save her faded ancestral home, even if it means bucking society's expectations. Uh, in let's see, who dresses. She has no intention of marrying a man, so she calls herself Gentleman Jack. Um, so it turns out she's a real person. But yeah, it's about lesbians.
See,
Um,
that's what I'm saying. Like, it's great that it's another show entirely. I wouldn't. I don't think I'd get as much out of it as if there was a lesbian couple in Bridgerton versus just an entire show about a lesbian couple during the Regency period. Huh.
Certainly, your idea of like there being a happy ending, because I don't know how Gentleman Jack, I haven't seen it, but I don't
Yeah,
know
I know
whether
that.
they just kind of live in, the shadows, if they get married, if they're out there, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but certainly considering, even though Bridgerton is, as we said, kind of like an idealized version of the world,
Hmm.
where, the costumes really are that colorful and the diversity is amplified and the racism isn't that bad, still, people do have a sense of like if you get too historically inaccurate, like people do push back. And because even with like the sense of diversity, I mean, we talked about it, that like is realistic, still people have this idea that like back then everyone was white, everyone was straight, everyone was cis. And so for suddenly all eight members of the Bridgerton family to be like, we're cool with you being gay, Benedict, I can imagine people being like, that's not real.
Yeah.
Just to, just
Yeah.
to get upset about accuracy.
Yeah, and also we have such a hard time having LGBT representation in media in general that I feel like it would just be really difficult to greenlight an entire season of a gay love story. Um, I mean, like, the representation that we see in media now is like Disney Plus having two moms and a 30-second clip of Finding Dory. Like, that's their LGBT representation, and it's revolutionary. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Well,
I don't know. I feel like, yeah.
yeah, I do think I think Disney specifically, I don't know if that's like an accurate representation wholly, just because they try not to piss off all of the conservative people living in the country who are big Disney fans, but they also want to appear to like they just want to appear to like all people, so they like make a big deal about like how we're being progressive while staying like very minimally. um
Right, and I don't mean just to call out Disney. I mean,
yeah.
I don't mean just point out Disney as like LGBT representation, but like just the fact that there is so little representation in all media that having like that be a center story of the year of the month because Disney did it. Like if LGBT representation was just kind of like normalized, then having a same-sex couple in a Disney movie would be like, okay, cool. Like I guess it's cool that it's in children's media, but like honestly, it's not really that needed because it's
Yeah.
normalized. But that it just goes to show how not normal it is
Yeah.
that something like that could be such a big deal to the
Yeah.
community.
And because I feel
Yeah.
like if you search the depths, especially because with audience fragmentation, there's so much more room for like diverse stories and stories that represent different people. And if you search like the depths of, streaming services, of channels, of film festivals, if you talk to people who are trying to develop their shows and get them out there, the reality is you're going to find like a lot of diverse stories about like people of color, about LGBTQ stories. Um, but the reality is that like of the a bulk of the population is paying attention to the same works that come out by the big hitters like Disney. And that's why we pay attention to like Disney's like minimal representation more than we look at shows that are going to have like a lot more representation. And because thinking about,
Right.
there's this new show which I haven't watched yet, but I've heard about it, called Our Flag Means Death, on,
Hmm.
I think, HBO Max, and it's directed by and starring Taika Waititi. And it's about a bunch of pirates, and like most of the characters are gay. And apparently, a lot of people really like it, and it's getting a lot of buzz. But I really don't think it would get the buzz it was getting. I haven't watched it yet, but like no matter how good it is, I think a big like drawing point is Taika Waititi himself. So
It's also a comedy too, and
yeah.
and LGBT is more digestible when it's funny.
Mm-hmm. And it's well, it's better when it's. I mean, considering there's so many like dramas about, oh my God, you're gay. How
Yeah,
tragic to be in our society.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
good to have something that's not that.
Right, but even though it is a step in the right direction, I feel like, I mean, and then we also go into the story. I mean, into the situation of like also just like black stories being told. Like, if a black story is told, it usually is told with tragedy or slavery, and we like don't see a lot of black stories that just talk about black joy and black love. I feel like the same thing with like LGBT. Like, if it's not a comedy, then it's something super tragic where the lover dies, or
Yeah.
it's about the journey of coming out or the journey of discovering sexuality. Like, I feel like with both stories, we don't really always see the joy in the middle. After all the drama. Um, yeah, so but I feel like that's a conversation for another time as well.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of Bridgerton, though, I I love the sex. I love the couples. And I think that what they do know and and what they're doing well, they should just continue doing that with and just evolving that.
Yeah. So, this brings us to our final segment of the podcast called Convince Chad.
Convince Chad. Oh man.
So, imagine this, Ashi.
All right.
So, you're walking into your jujitsu class and
Oh gosh.
you're on the mat. You're about to beat a dude up. And who you're beating up, his name is Chad. And
Yeah.
while you're waiting, you're like, "Hey, have you watched Bridgerton season 2 yet?" And he's like, "Bridgerton? Nah, bro. That shit's for girls." You're enraged. Even though the teacher didn't blow the whistle, you take a swing at him. You're like, "You don't know what you're talking about, bro. Bridgerton's amazing." The teacher's pissed at you for the reckless violence. Time to have a serious conversation. In Chad's own language, you must explain to him why Bridgerton is so freaking awesome.
Bro. Well, you know what? Hold up. Hold up. Everyone stop. Catherine, stop rolling on the mat. Everyone just sit. Everyone get on your knees. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. I'm looking at every single one of you right now. Chad, especially you. I can't believe that you would say you're not going to watch second season of Bridgerton. Are you kidding me? Okay, all right. Let me say this in a way that you all get it. Sex. Beautiful people, women and men. Sex. And love. I mean, come on, guys. We're all fighters here. We all know the art of love and war. But we always experience war. When are we really gonna? When do we have time to see love? True love, the idea of love and how it expands and grows like a blossoming flower. I mean, come on, bro. When's the last time you called your mom? Right? It's been a long time. Now, Bridgerton is absolutely phenomenal because I guess it does seem a little girly. Yeah, we see some pretty dresses and some pretty women, and we talk about love and these love stories, but it teaches us how to love and what it's like to find that partner in crime. You know, like we're going through stages in our life where finding partners is easy. We can use Tinder and and Grinder and Hinge and all that stuff, and we can find all these people easily. But like, what would it be like to find true love? Is that even a possibility in our real world? I don't know. But at least we get a hint of that in Bridgerton. We get to see what the fantasy of love really is in a way that's digestible for all people. And bro, I mean, suck it up. I saw you cry when you watched Mean Girls. You loved it. So take a chance on Bridgerton. It's pretty great. And I think that you'll feel like more of a man coming out of it.
Well, I think Chad's pretty convinced.
Yeah. After this conversation, he asked me if he could borrow my login. I had to give it to him.
Well, Ashi, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
It was a great episode. And listeners, remember to subscribe, rate and review, and we'll see you next time.
Bro's Guide to Glitter. Yeah.